Welcome back to Cowlitz River Restoration. My name's Sarah and I'm going to be your host. This awesome dresser belongs to my sister and I'm going to refinish it for her to match a desk that I recently refinished and flipped to her. So I'm going to start off by removing all of the hardware. I started off with this screwdriver but then switched to an electric drill. I then washed up all the hardware to get it nice and clean. I used Dawn dish soap and water, and then I went ahead and wiped it down with vinegar. The vinegar that I used is just a plain white distilled vinegar that you can get at any store. The top of this dresser is a veneer overlay, as well as all the drawers. So when you're sanding veneer, you have to be really careful not to go too far or you'll get into the particle board underneath. I started off with a 120 and used that to buff out the top sealer as well as that stain that was over the veneer to kind of get it down to the base. Once I had it down to the base, I went over it again with a 220 grit to really smooth it out so it had a nice smooth feel on the top. Now I don't apply a lot of pressure because like I said, you don't want to cut through that veneer overlay and get into that particle board. There are ways to correct that mistake. I know because I've made that mistake, but if you can avoid it, it's best to try not to do that. Now I feel like I need to do another video and do that on purpose so that I can show you guys how to correct it when you accidentally go all the way through the veneer. So stay tuned, that might come up next. Let me know if you want to see. The drawers were also a veneer overlay. I did the exact same thing. I went over it with the 120 and then I went over it with the 220 just to buff it out and make it really smooth and get it down to that base so that I can stain it and do my distress wash on it. And then I took a little video to show me moving it into the house so that I can show kind of that glamour behind the scenes of what really goes on when I'm doing projects at home. These are the products I used for this next section. I'm going to use this tack cloth that I got from my local Home Depot to wipe down all the drawers. It's kind of sticky. The sticky doesn't get on the drawers, but you will have to wash your hands afterwards, but it works so good at getting all of that dust off. It's great for prepping when you do sanding. And then I use my vacuum to clean out all the insides of the drawers just to get all of that sanding dust off. I feel like I need to point out on the top and even on the drawers that when I sanded it down, the finish isn't completely even, but that's okay because I'm gonna stain it and then I'm going to use distress painting or weather painting to really give it the look that I want. I use that top cloth also inside of the dresser, and then like I said, I vacuumed out all the drawers to get all that dust out of there. Be sure to wear gloves when you're staining, and also if you're staining inside like I'm doing here, crack those windows because this is some harsh stuff. I'm using a wood stain by Varathane that is English chestnut. I picked this wood stain up at my local Home Depot and they have all kinds of colors to choose from, but this is the color that I chose for this piece. I really like to use the dip and wipe method when I'm doing drawers, and oftentimes when I'm doing like tabletops or the tops of dressers, I like to do the pour and wipe method. I just use an old rag, or sometimes I'll use an old t-shirt that I've cut up. I have found that I just like the way that the stain goes on when I use those things, and they're really cost effective. That pour and wipe method that I was just referring to. So after I get this whole piece stained, I'm going to do a distress painting, which I used a watered down charcoal paint. Now, what I do is I dip my bristles in to the paint and I get them dry again, basically. I get all the excess off, and then I just lightly brush the top to try to mimic the pattern of wood grain. And it takes a lot of dipping and wiping and dipping and wiping. It's pretty time consuming. And what's cool about using chalk paint to do this tinting is that if it goes on too strong or too deep, I can use water and I can dilute it out a little bit, or I can even wash it off, because chalk paint can be washed off until you wax seal it. Once you wax seal it, it's on there. But until then, it's water-based and you can wash it back off. So it's pretty forgiving, and I like the different patterns and the different textures that I can create when using this product. I also love that it's water-based, so if I want to thin it out or if my product starts getting a little too thick, I can just add a little bit of water to it and I'm good to go. When you're doing this method of distress painting on wood to kind of create that weathered wood look, it's very important that you go with the wood grain. If you go against the wood grain, it's going to look very unnatural. So with the wood grain, it can be a little bit tricky when you have different pieces of wood grains going different directions. So you have to be really mindful of where your brush is at, and it can be time consuming trying to find that right consistency. But once you get it, you're good. So once that was all done, I waited for it to dry. After you distress paint, you have to wait for it to dry before you wax. It dries pretty quick though. So once it's all dried, you can wax it up. I really like the wax that I use. It's wood wax by Min Wax. Again, picked up at my local Home Depot, and I love the durability of it. So now that my drawers and my top is done, I'm gonna prime this. Now I had some chalk paint from another project that I did, and I like to use all of my products to get her done. You know, I don't wanna have a bunch of things that I'm not using. I use all of them until they are empty. So I had this chalk paint left over, and I decided to go ahead and use it as a primer on the base. I've had good experience with it, with durability. So I'm like, hey, you know what? Like, black always goes on streaky. So I always have to prime with something. Usually I'll do a charcoal, but I was running low on charcoal, so I had this chalk paint, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna use this chalkboard paint as my primer, and it worked out really good. I only needed one coat of this chalkboard paint and then another coat of my black paint through Rust-Oleum, and it covered excellently. So I'm really happy with how it turned out. And again, when I'm painting, I like all my brush strokes to be kind of going the same direction depending on where I'm at, but it also depends on the look I'm going for. If I'm going for a cleaner look, I'm gonna want my brush strokes kind of going the same direction. But if I'm wanting something a little aged, I might switch it up. But with this one, I wanted them all kind of going the same direction because I wanted something really smooth looking. My chalk paint started getting a little thick, so I thinned it out at the end for this very last section and to stretch it a little bit. So once that chalk paint is dry, because you want it to be dry, your primer has to dry before you put on your top coat. So once that's dry, then I went ahead and I did my top coat. I used a flat black by Rust-Oleum. It's a furniture paint. It's called flat black. For me, to my eye, I think it has a little bit more of a shine to it when it dries. But if you don't want the shine, you can use wax, which I like to do, and then it still has a little bit of a shine. It's more of like an eggshell, but if you like the shine, you could use a satin, and that would make it have more of a shine. So it's really just up to you and what looks good to your eye. But I went ahead and went over this entire dresser base with this black paint, and the coverage was great. It was exactly what I wanted. It went on really smooth, and again, all brush strokes the same direction. I wanted this to be a little distressed, slightly distressed around the edges. So I went around just the edges and slightly distressed them with a 220. So it was even like a pretty light sandpaper, just enough to expose a little bit of that wood around the corners and give it kind of that Pottery Barn style. After you do that, you have to get all of the dust off. So I went over it with a rag, and then I went back over it with a tack cloth to make sure that I had all of that paint dust off before I used my Annie Sloan's black wax. Now, typically they say that you need to clear wax before you use black wax, but in my opinion, I think that black wax directly onto black paint seals beautifully. I love the finish of it. So that's what I like to do for now. As I learn and grow and continue to do this, sometimes my methods change. A lot of times they change, but right now I'm really great. Like, I'm ecstatic for this technique because I'm stoked about the way that the black wax looks over the black paint. It looks awesome and it seals beautifully. So I go over this entire thing with that black wax. I like to have my brush strokes go the same direction when I use my black wax or any wax for that matter. I like my brush strokes to go the same direction because I feel like it gives a much smoother look. After that's done, you put on the hardware. I used an electric drill so that it didn't take 10 years. Got all the drawers back in there. That took a minute. Sometimes I have to number the backs of the drawers so that I can find the right place for them. And ta-da, that's it. It's all ready. My sister's happy with it. I'm happy with it. It turned out so beautiful. I can't wait to see it in its new place. Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope that you'll like and subscribe and come back and see what I have going on next. Have a good day. Bye.